Hello and welcome to Out of the Game podcast. This is episode 13. I'm hosting today because Jeff Green is sick with what's most likely a case of the swine flu. He's infected his entire family. Say hi with your shitty voice, Jeff.
Hi, guys.
We got Ngai Kroll here today.
Hola.
And Bobito.
Hello.
I'm trying to think of a good... Okay, yeah, whatever. Bobito works. No more pot seeds in your stool.
Thank you.
And first off today, we are going to talk about... You can tell how excited I am about Beatles Rock Band.
Why do you hate, Sean? No, we know why you hate. We know why you hate.
Okay.
It has to be complicated by the fact that I'm pretty sure Sean actually likes the Beatles quite a bit.
Yeah, I love the Beatles, and I don't even have anything against those games. It's just in this case I haven't played it, so I don't have any impressions, and they just all strike me as being more or less the same.
Does loving the Beatles make you loathe this particular version more? I'm just curious.
No, I can deal. I mean, no Beatles fan. Like, look, a Beatles fan my age, you came to it so late anyway that there were already, it was already the band that had music that you would hear elevator versions of, and that you would,
or Nike shoe commercials.
Exactly.
I will say that even though I'm really enjoying the Beatles Rock Band, I do think that it's part of what I'm calling the 1968 tax, which is that if you were alive in 1968, you have to buy one of the Beatles box sets that just came out this week and Beatles Rock Band.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many people on Twitter just looking at people talking about Beatles Rock Band, buying the whole thing without, having played these games ever before. It's just insane.
Yeah, no, I actually never played these games before, other than at events or people's houses. I've never owned one, and I did not feel compelled to do that. I took the cheap man's way out, and I bought Rock Band 2 bundle, and then the game Rock Band Beatles.
I think that's the better way to go, even, because then you can, if you want to, download songs for Rock Band 2.
Right, I figured I was getting another game, and I saved about $150 there, so...
Yeah. And you won't have the embarrassment of having paid for premium plastic instruments. Because that's embarrassing.
There's special edition instruments?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
with the Beatles
like
version?
the fancy, instrument version of Beatles Rock Band comes with, plastic guitars modeled on the guitars that the Beatles use. They have like a Rickenbacker guitar and a Hofner bass and a drum set with like a fake drum head on the front of it that says the Beatles, which looks ridiculous actually. But
the fake plastic Hofner bass does look pretty sweet. For a fake,
it looks pretty cool.
For a fake plastic bass.
And I think it might give Beatles Rock Band its due for being a game that's like so much fun to play on the bass. Like I personally have played tons of music games. I've played these games since Guitar Hero, sort of obsessively, and with the Beatles Rock Band, it's really interesting that because of the music of the Beatles, where the bass played such a prominent role, playing bass in the game is a lot of fun, and that's what I kind of prefer to play when I play the game.
Isn't it still insanely repetitive, though?
Well,
no.
It depends on the level that you play it on, for one thing.
I thought like even Beatles bass lines, as far as I know, they're really repetitive, as most bass lines are, unless you're some wankfest like what is it with you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
What's
I
that
do.
band?
Well, I mean, some
Sailing
of it
the
is
Seas of Cheese.
Is that you're part of the rhythm section, so you're laying down a rhythm which by its very essence is repetitive. Except Paul McCartney was a very fluid melodic bass player, and so he'll. Even if it's repetitive, his lines are so interesting that they're fun to play in a repetitive way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's really like riffing on things all the time. I mean, in a lot of ways, especially in the early Beatles music, it's almost obnoxious. Like you can hear Paul McCartney trying to show the world that he's a great musician, like all the time. I mean, the early bass lines in those songs, he's just going nuts. It's just like walking bass. 10 notes per measure, just going crazy with it.
It's kind of true.
But at the same time, it's like really infectious and really catchy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
So Robert, are you listening to the new box set as your and that? and playing at the same time? And are you getting anything like any sort of cross pollination of information or things you're observing because you're sort of fake playing as well as listening to the music just as a listener?
Well, it's weird. I've probably heard every Beatles song like 50 times. Maybe not every Beatles song, but certainly my favorite stuff. I've heard so much, and I know it backwards and forwards, and so it makes playing the game really interesting because I know what's coming like 99% of the time, and it makes it really fun for like we had a party on Friday night and we had like 20 people over, and I set up 3 mics and I set up a couple of the mics on mic stands because it has 3-part harmony, and the mics that I set up on mic stands, you can stand there and play one of the guitars or the bass or whatever, and sing along. And when you know the song well enough where you don't have to worry about like reading the lyrics or whatever, you can actually play it like you're in a band. And I know Sean is just like embarrassed by the by the thought of people doing this, like just picturing it in his mind. It was actually though like a really really good time. And the thing that I would say about the game the best thing about it is just that it gives people who have never sung harmony before an opportunity to enjoy that. It's just something that people used to do all the time in church or in the pub, or back when people would actually play music instead of just consuming it. People understood how fun it was to sing in harmony with each other, and it was really interesting to watch all of these people at the party give it a shot and figure it out. We were actually hitting a lot of 3-part harmonies at the party, and I'm talking about like it was a really fucking drunken party, and it was amazing how good the singing was.
Yeah, I'm surprised to say this, but I think that I don't know about the Rock Band games proper because I'd never owned them, but in this one at least, there's some like pretty damn good musical teaching tools in there. I mean, they actually have a thing that sort of runs through the idea of what it means to sing harmony, and even the drum trainer is pretty damn good. I mean, I've never drummed. I actually did play bass in a band years ago. So I spent a lot of time with a drummer, but I never actually sat down at a drum kit. And I went through the trainer and actually really seriously learned a lot. That I believe maybe it's not 100% translatable to real drums, but even if it's like 30%, that's pretty good for a game.
I mean, I do play the drums, and I would say that the actual drum beats in the Rock Band games are really, really close to playing the drums. The only difference is that you don't have the physicality of using like heavy sticks and hitting drums that are far apart. It's like going from playing you can play like drums in a Rock Band game and feel like you were just like the biggest badass on earth, and then the minute you sit behind a real drum kit and you have to use like physical strength, it's just like you will become suddenly winded and feel 100 years old. But I mean, it's totally the coordination, which is the hardest thing to learn, is all there.
That's the thing.
Everything else is kind of minute.
No, Jeff, I know you said that you didn't own any of the Rock Bands previously to buying Rock Band 2 and then Beatles, but you've been to a number of parties and things like that. Do you feel like there starts to be something different about it being the Beatles? I mean, this super iconic band and just their music, as opposed to a collection of songs by a variety of artists.
Well, part of it is what Robert said, is that for many, many, many of us, the songs are so ingrained in our brain that, I'd say at least 90% of the 45 songs in Rock Band Beatles, I don't have to look at the lyric sheet at all, or the floating lyrics, because they're so ingrained in my head. So there's something of this instant like party giant karaoke machine that this thing becomes, just because it's so easy that way. I have spent a little time with Rock Band 2 since it came with the kit I bought, and the difference for me is palpable. I mean, for one thing, it's like bands I've never heard of, or if I've heard of them, I hate them. Or even if I know them, like I don't really know, thank God, all the words to Eye of the Tiger. And, even though I know the melody and all that, like singing them, that's like where I feel like a douche. Whereas, like, you can't you can't not feel great singing "Here Comes the Sun" with your kid in front of Rock Band Beatles. It's just, to me, it's just, it's a difference between the Beatles are. I mean, I'm a fanboy, but the quality of the music is so much superior to so much of what goes in these other music games that, to me, the whole experience is just. I feel like Harmonix was completely right to quarantine the Beatles from Rock Band proper, because it's completely its own experience, and that also goes for the aesthetic of the entire experience. I mean, the graphics, everything about it is a totally separate experience.
So you didn't want John Lennon singing, "Yeah, boy."
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. I think that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, like, before we move into like making fun of Kurt Cobain singing "Yeah, boy," I just wanted to say the other thing, like having played Rock Band games at parties a million times, is that with the Beatles, finally, like, girls at the party had something they wanted to sing, like, for the first time. Like, there would be in the entire. I have so many downloadable songs on Rock Band, and every time we would have a party, it would be like there are 10 songs that girls want to sing, whereas with the Beatles, like, they would just be like, yeah, pick whatever, I know all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's great to finally have some equity that way.
Yeah. And going back to what Robert said a little earlier about appreciating the songs, I mean, one thing that I'm finding playing them on both bass and guitar and a little bit on drums is and I think that this would be true. I've read on message boards other people having the same kind of experience, is to be able to appreciate parts of the songs in ways that, even though I've heard of a million times, I never have. So some of the complexity of the songwriting, which I knew intellectually, when you're playing it and you see what they're doing, it really hits home a lot harder. And the perfect example of that for me was "Ticket to Ride," which has this really kind of intense, interesting kind of offbeat thing going on, especially for being so early in their career. Ringo's drumming at the beginning is so bizarre, but then it hits into you get into the bridge. It does that, just this incredibly driving, straight ahead rock thing that I actually never even noticed was in the song until I started playing it myself. And when you hit that bridge and it starts doing that, as someone quote unquote playing it, it made me appreciate the song twice as much as I ever did before. So I think in some ways, a game like Rock Band can really teach you to appreciate what songwriters are doing. It can't make you a musician, obviously, but it can make you sort of understand what goes into what makes a good song better.
That's always been my thing with Rock Band and music games in general, is that whenever you read these stories about the games, people always frame them in terms of, like, is this like being in a band? Or is this like being a musician? Can this teach you to be a musician? And I think that those stories totally miss the point that the games aren't about teaching you technical skill as a musician. They're about training your ears. Because for a lot of people hear music, especially younger people, and they don't hear all the specifics of what's inside of a song. They might hear the singing, they might hear the rhythm, they hear, the weird sounds that pop up now and again, like the interesting sounds, but they're not picking a song apart and saying, oh, that's a really interesting bass line, or oh, I like it when the guitar does that, or I love that keyboard line, or whatever. And I think Rock Band, sort of trains people, or can train people, to pick songs apart and to really understand how instruments work together to create music.
Dude, Weed has been teaching kids that a lot longer than Rock Band.
But
I was listening to you as you say that, and I'm like, I was like, wait,
the mountain.
Dude, like I think your notion of what a non-musician takes away from music is maybe a little too harsh. I mean, because
I hate to say it, but you completely speak the truth, Sean. You're totally right.
I don't know. I'm not saying that's non-musician. I'm just saying there are a lot of, like, non-serious music listeners. Like, I know plenty of music listeners, like serious music listeners, who can pick pick like the weirdest songs apart and really do have like a rich experience listening to music. But I also know people like my mom, who is 52 and has never really learned to pick the elements in a song apart. Like, she loves music, but she hears it as an abstract thing. She hears the lyrics and she hears the melody and she hears the beat, but she doesn't know the difference between the instruments that are playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know lots of people like that who just never picked up an ear for picking music apart. And I do think that. Go ahead.
No, you could finish your thought. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I do think that Rock Band could help people hear music more completely like that.
I was going to say, take it in a scientific direction, but first I totally wanted to agree that it's never made any sense when the standard for Guitar Hero and Rock Band's viability has been whether or not they teach you to play music. I mean, any more fair than it would be to say that Call of Duty is a shit game, because if you took what you learned from that, I mean, basically, where your understanding of where brown people spawn and where to throw grenades at, you'd be dead in a fucking second. So that's just not fair. But it's interesting what you're saying about how it teaches you to sort of parse the music and see the interrelationships and how the things are working. Because I've been reading about neuroplasticity recently, and that's just the notion that. Well, the old notion for your brain was that they're hardwired, right? That they work sort of the parts of your brain are analogous to your organs, and that your frontal cortex or your parietal lobe are basically designed to just do one sort of function, and it will always perform that function. But what research over the past 30 years has shown is that your brain's much more plastic than that, especially when you're young, but even up through old age. It's musicians, the parts of their cortex that process, auditory stimuli and all this other things are massively larger by a big percentage, 20 to 50% larger in musicians than they are in non-musicians. And the mental, the sort of neuronal maps that you call them for processing that stuff are much more finely grained. So, like, an example would be, like, I'm going to give you an example, from just an animal, right? If you play a tone for a young rat and you look in its brain, which specific neurons light up, you can play a whole range of tones, and it's always just the same cluster that lights up. But as you continue to expose it over time to different tones, not only will they start to differentiate, at first you'll see this massive growth in that area. I mean, because your brain is always trying to say what's most important. There's limited space here, and you're going to lose anything you're not using. And everything comes at a cost, too. So the musicians that have all that cortex taken up for audio stuff, that's space that's not being invested in, any other number of things. But so what would happen is that you basically build pathways in your brain that are physical, that you can prove that are dedicated to processing certain types of, certain senses that are dedicated to types of perception. It makes sense that, even paying that kind of attention to music over time, and especially with a reward scenario that you have, like in Rock Band. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm not trying to go on too long, but especially with the reward system, it's basically exactly what they did to the rats. You get a reward for doing well in that and for paying attention and differentiating those notes. And it makes perfect sense. I think even scientifically that it would have the result you're talking about, Robert. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think I've lost in my brain? Because I can't even count the number of things that I may have lost.
Yeah,
I think my brain is occupied by a lot of dumb shit.
I think that's for everyone, though. Anytime you're a specialist in something, I'm starting to wonder, because we don't know now the extent to which everything has a neuronal map. We know, like I said, that senses do, your hands. The touch in your fingertips, your genitals, your ears, every bit of sensory stimuli that's coming in. And then, like we said, anything with language, with speaking and reading and listening. But what if video games, the theory has also been that television and stuff too, they changed actually the way that your brain is wired. I wonder if I get in that with video games that I've played, especially for years and years, like Company Heroes, and it becomes this comfort food and I don't want to do anything else, because the downside of that same plasticity is that you dedicate so much of your space to doing something well, and you've told your mind that this is important, that this is valuable, and then it's very greedy with maintaining that. It's kind of like if you think that like it kind of wears a groove. Like if if you're skiing down a slope, you have a chance of going any which direction, but if you continually ski over time, you'll start to notice that you're following a path because you're basically putting a groove into it.
Sure.
I don't know. Do you guys?
So this is kind of our parents saying that this shit will rot our brain out is kind of true.
Well, it seems more to me like it seems more to me like the message is that you got to always make sure you're trying new things and new games, new experiences in your life to try to push your brain to change and keep up and not wear the grooves of Company of Heroes into your brain hour after hour, day after
exactly.
day.
I mean, don't you think most of us, our brains do tell us that? I mean, even if you're playing Company of Heroes for 10 hours straight or WoW for 26 hours straight.
Think about Jeff, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, a lot of people, especially as they get older, and how they become fixed in their ways, right?
Sure.
Their diet remains the same. The music that they listen to remains largely the same.
Right.
The types of television that they watch,
yes.
the types of books that they read. And you're right, though, Robert.
Yeah.
Robert's right about it being really beneficial to go outside of that because, in all taking, this new knowledge of neuroplasticity and using it to rehabilitate stroke victims, people with dementia, people with even its work, on some autistic people. The best thing they can ever find is just flat out, aside from programs that they have, is to just learn another language in old age.
Sure.
But also, or to learn to play an instrument.
Yes.
And it proves that it has beneficial side effects that don't apply just to, say, speaking another language or playing another instrument. It makes you much sharper.
I mean, I don't think I'm unique. I find that to just be sort of a general survival instinct. I mean, certainly part of my my instinct to leave Ziff, I mean, not just because the place was imploding, was also because of the need to try something new as I was getting older. I mean, also in the last 12 months, I did exactly what you're suggesting, and I started teaching myself how to play guitar. I even think about, when I got the opportunity to go to Gamescom, part of it was well, I've never been to that part of Germany before. I mean, part of all of that, I think, is the same impulse. It's my brain saying, I'm alive here and I got to try new things. I don't want to just wear down that same groove on the slope,
Yeah. I'm glad you did that.
But I don't
I
think
agree,
most
people.
I didn't mean that to be 2 minutes of self-congratulatory soliloquy there. I mean, God, I'm awesome. I meant it more like just observing what I did as feeling well, isn't that what we all do, though, as a way to sort of keep ourselves alive is, I think most of our brains function that way, don't they?
A lot of people don't do that, though, and exactly. What you're right is when you look at some of the longest-lived people who still have the sharpest minds well into old age, travel and that kind of almost you can confuse it for dilettantism is sort of characteristic of almost all of them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of people, Jeff, unlike what you're saying, they do all the learning and processing when they're young and up through their 20s, and then they sort of master a profession. And then at that point, it's more just tuning what they already know rather than acquiring new stuff. And then they go on with that and then, just continue down that path until they retire.
I was talking to a friend of mine from college who's in his 40s like me, and he was one of my music buddies back in the day. So we'd go to the clubs in LA when we both lived there, and being current with the new bands was very much the thing, and we started talking about music, and he completely bummed me out because, he started saying that shit that, you just don't want to hear in terms of, really, has there been anything good since 1983? That kind of thing, And then, I mean, didn't we really peak with the Go-Go's? That kind of thing. And I'm like, Jesus.
And rap's not music.
Right. I'm like, Jesus, dude, really? And he was, amazed at me that, someone... I mean, it's the same thing I'll hear from people, half my age. It's wow, you're so cool for listening to new music. And to me, it's not I'm not, that's just what I do. It's not an age thing at all. It's just I want to hear new stuff because I want to hear new stuff,
So what did he say when you started showing him crabcore videos on YouTube?
Yeah, that wasn't a good argument for why you should keep listening to new stuff.
Okay, so what's the deal with Kurt Cobain in here? I've seen tweets about that too, and I hadn't been following. So what's the sacrilege that they've committed?
Oh God.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's sacrilege. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that we should like enshrine musicians or celebrities in their like mythology or whatever. But I just think one of the reasons that people picked up on this, there was this video that was going around. They put Kurt Cobain as a playable character into the new Guitar Hero game, which is what, 5, 6. One of those large numbers. They have him as a playable character, and you can sort of use him as your character throughout the game, playing other people's songs. So the video was going through all of these sort of outrageous songs that Kurt Cobain would never have, enjoyed, even like like shitty butt metal from the 80s and stuff. And the amazing thing is they don't keep the posture or the acting of the Kurt Cobain model throughout the songs. They actually just switch up to the singer of whatever band is playing. So you're looking at Kurt Cobain singing,
doing Def Leppard kicks and shit.
Def Leppard, yeah, but with like the posture of that kind of singer, like being outlandish and jumping around and stuff. It's just really goofy and silly, and especially in light of the Beatles Rock Band coming out and being this like really almost overly reverential take on the Beatles, where they treating them like gods, but then seeing like Kurt Cobain basically just thrown into Guitar Hero like a fucking prize in a box of cereal or something.
Well, and the Beatles, the surviving Beatles, and then their estates, they're profiting from that reverence too. And how the fuck did Cobain end up in here?
Right.
I don't know. There was a big controversy this week because Courtney Love claims that she didn't. She claims that she didn't sign anything or allow them to do this, and Activision is like, please, like here's your contract,
right?
And
She's claiming, or her lawyer, she went nuts and released like some insane number of tweets in a short period of time, because I think she was getting called out on Twitter for this stuff and seeing it pop up. So, but the thing is that her lawyer is claiming that while yes, they did license Kurt Cobain's likeness and some songs, is that they're claiming that it wasn't a blanket license. So I guess they're using the excuse that, we didn't know they were going to do that with it. And my guess is that, Activision's been doing this for a long time. They've made a number of games, as has, Red Octane, which they acquired. And, they probably do a pretty good job of vetting which rights they have and which rights they don't.
Oh, yeah. And of all the things to cover your ass on.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's like, I remember when Rock Band Beatles was announced, and when it was clear that, unlike the other Rock Band games, you weren't going to be able to export the songs into your game, into the larger Rock Band 2 or Rock Band 1, so that you could have your own avatar sing those songs or them sing other songs. I was kind of bummed because I felt like that was one of the things I really liked about Rock Band. I feel it shows a certain progressiveness and catering to the player that you can have most, if not all, of your songs in one place. You only need one game to access them and that kind of stuff. And they're even segregating the DLC. So the Beatles DLC is not going to be playable in Rock Band 2 or Rock Band 1. The Beatles are sort of their own separate world.
Right.
And that kind of bummed me out. I felt like it was regression. But then when I saw the Cobain video that went up on the on YouTube, I was like, well, shit, maybe the Beatles and Harmonix had a point. I mean, my guess is the Beatles estates and the living Beatles insisted on it. But looking at it and looking at Kurt Cobain, you just realize I just felt like just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I had this similar ghastly feeling watching that as I did back in the mid '80s when I saw Natalie Cole singing the unforgettable quote unquote duet with her deceased father.
Yeah,
I was just like, there's something fucked up about this.
That's dirty.
And just someone that had such a hard time with fame and pop culture in the first place, and its success in that sphere.
That's the thing. I mean, I've tried to understand my own feelings about this because I felt the same way when I saw the Cobain thing. I just felt sick, and I felt that that it was total validation for the way Harmonix handled Beatles Rock Band. But then I had to think about my own feelings, like why is it does it seem so nasty that it's Cobain, and why does it seem so right to quarantine the Beatles this way? Whereas I probably wouldn't feel the same way with other musicians. Like, you know, if this was Huey Lewis we were talking about, would I give a shit? Of course not. But so where do we draw the line? I mean, where do we get to say, like, okay, well, it's okay for Huey Lewis to do, you know, to be doing butt rock, but not Kurt Cobain.
It's easy enough with living people because you just ask if they want to do it, then they want to do it. But I mean, when you get into people that are deceased, that's when it becomes problematic.
But looking at how the game started out, you know, in Guitar Hero, it was set avatars. You could play one of 5, 6, or 7 characters that were there, and it was covers, right? So obviously they tried to make the covers sound as much like the original songs, but they were covers. Then with a handful of originals. Then as they went forward, they added some more originals. Then with Rock Band 1 and I guess Guitar Hero 3 at that point, they tried to go with mostly originals and dial back the covers. But in the case of Rock Band, you were building, it was almost more like you were a cover band in the sense that you were creating your own avatars from scratch. And if you worked really hard, you could make them look like some people. But the point was, you know, it was not about playing as the artists. So now with Rock Band Beatles and with, you know, and this is the first time Activision's done it, they had Jimi Hendrix in one of their previous games, though I think that is the Jimi Hendrix estate limited it to Jimi Hendrix on Jimi Hendrix songs. But now that you can have the likeness of an actual singer or musician performing songs that they did not do, it's so you can sort of see with the evolution of these games, something that wasn't an issue before is an issue now. And what's interesting is that, and maybe sort of telling, you know, Kurt Cobain sort of being a little more relevant to certain people, apparently it's not only Kurt Cobain, because Johnny Cash is also in the game.
Oh, really?
And I believe you can also have him getting his Flavor Flav on.
Oh, God, that's disgusting. Yeah, well, I guess you're right.
But I think
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think in both instances, the thing that Jeff, the thing that you're finding, like tug at your stomach, is like our perception of the myth of these groups. And you know, with Nirvana and with Kurt Cobain, you have this whole story about him being this like real, you know, anti-corporate guy who was a big success, but he never felt comfortable with it, which was total bullshit. I mean, the guy from an early age wanted to be a rock star. I mean, when they released his fucking diaries, which was disgusting, you know, in his diary, when he was 17 years old, he wrote that he wanted to become the world's biggest rock star and then kill himself. You know, this is something like that he always wanted, and he always sort of played with this image of being, you know, Mr. True Artist, or like pained, you know, suffering person. And so when you take it and you turn it into this just like totally bland, boring, you know, downloadable content like Kurt Cobain's a T-shirt. It sucks. And the same thing with that's what sort of gets to me about the Beatles, though, is that the way they try to gloss over so many things and make it seem like the Beatles were always just this great group who stuck together and they were into flower power and love and everything. And you know, they show them when you play a song from the White Album, and they're all in the studio together playing together and like looking each other in the eye and stuff. And it's like, please, they were never in the same room. They recorded all their tracks at different times. Paul and John hated each other. You know, they had other musicians coming in all the time. But when you play like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, they show like George Harrison playing guitar on that song, even though during that time, George Harrison walked out and John Lennon's like, oh, well, fuck him, let's just get Eric Clapton in here. And that's what they did,
well, what are you going to do?
I mean even that not with that song, because that's a George Harrison song, but I mean.
Right, but yeah. I mean, they can't put that stuff in the game, obviously. I mean.
Well, wait. No, it's not that they can't. It's that the Beatles estate and surviving Beatles probably weren't up for all that. Just like they probably wouldn't authorize that in a biopic where someone needed to get the rights to use the original music. I'm not saying it to excuse it, but I think Robert's raising a really valid point that that there are statements that are being made in the game about what it is they were and weren't. It's a celebration that completely whitewashes the complexity of the actual band. And this is something that you find in other art forms, but is it something that should be thought about and considered? Like, for people who are coming to the Beatles through this, what picture of the Beatles are they getting?
Well, I think what they're getting here is
possible to do something more.
I think it's going. I mean, it is a great point. But I think that what it is. It's what we talked about earlier. It's a celebration and appreciation of their music itself. It's not. This isn't a Beatles documentary. I mean, there's a million of those out there. I mean, certainly we can go anywhere and find a detailed history of the drug use and the argumentativeness and the fact that they had to hide their wives away early on in their career, and one sordid thing after another if you want to, but that's not the purpose of this game, which is a game after all. I mean, I don't know. I suppose it's possible that within the unlock system, they could have, in the little sort of Beatles biography stuff, they could have gone on into it there. They could have talked about the drug use, but then it gets complicated by ESRB matters if they started doing that stuff. So maybe this.
But I just think like this is something that I think games are probably going to have to deal with a lot, further down the line, where there's a game about a historical time, or historical characters. Like, do games have any responsibility to be accurate with their representation of things that happened in the past? Should games have any kind of fidelity to that? In the same way that, like, if you were watching a movie about the Beatles, and the Beatles that were represented in that movie were like the Beatles in Rock Band, they were just all great guys who kind of looked
that would be utterly
like
annoying.
The nicest dudes in a room. Yeah, it would be like, who the fuck are these guys? And so I totally understand why that wouldn't happen today, because obviously, like, the Beatles estate is totally in the driver's seat, and Harmonix doesn't have any power in this, and they were probably lucky just to be able to make the game. Much less like make a game that had any sort of critical things about the Beatles in it. But it's just an interesting thing to talk about,
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And the complete non-mention of drugs is, of course, completely interesting. I mean, it's there, it's all over the place, implied, but never explicitly said in the whole second half of the game. But I do think one last thing about the even though they don't talk about like the loathing and the separation that the band had, I did find it interesting that the last section I finished the story mode, and the last rooftop concert thing is a fairly joyless affair. If you compare it to other parts of the game, they did sort of tamp down the sort of happy, bright colored thing. It's like a gray drab thing and the Beatles themselves, at least in my mind, aren't smiling a lot in that whole last set. But
I think that's true. That is true.
But you're right in general. Yeah. I wonder if they had complete license to be as honest as possible. It's just speculation, but would we have had a better game there? I don't know.
It doesn't even make sense. You guys are driving me fucking crazy.
What?
Do you
Break
know?
it down.
Well, like, say when you buy it, did you need to advertise on the record cover for Abbey Road that the creations in which the album were created were such for someone to appreciate it? I mean, it's entirely irrelevant to the experience of listening to the music. And then I think which is part of what the Rock Band game is more than an educational tool about the creation conditions. It's about enjoying both listening to the music and playing along, in quotes, playing along with it.
Well, that was
and it
my
just
whole first
seems
point.
so out of
But
place.
Sean,
and
hold
the
on,
visuals,
hold
though.
on.
One other thing I have to add is that who the fuck even noticed what's going on outside of the colored circle track, other than the people that are waiting for their turn too? It's like in the times that I played those games, that shit is just like it's invisible to me.
I totally
see
see that stuff when I play it. I see that stuff. But also, Sean, I was just gonna say, like, it's also in the way that the game presents itself. Like, it's not like you just turn it on and it says the Beatles, and then you go and play a song. The whole way the game is packaged is as if you're playing through the Beatles' career, and they have these cutscenes that sort of weave a simple narrative about the band throughout the game. And they're supposed to sort of introduce you to the band and what the band was all about, and take you through all these important moments in the band's history. And that's what sets you up for the expectation that there's going to be some presentation of facts there, because there are facts there, and they are trying to sort of represent these different times in the band's history. And I don't think it's unreasonable to just consider whether or not the game misrepresents what the band was actually like.
Yeah.
I think that just because it's a game, or just because it's music and not a documentary, that you can't wonder, like, what would this be like if it were to be really real about the band. I think it may have been more interesting that way, and I think it could actually shed light on why the music changed over time, and on give you more opportunities to appreciate the Beatles. Because if you look at, like, Beatles fandom, a lot of it is, you listen to the music, but then there are also 50,000 books and movies and other things. People have always felt driven to learn about the band, to understand how they made their music and under what conditions, and I think that's just part of being interested in the music.
Well, again,
right, but I mean, like,
the only place I would have really liked to see that happen, if it were to have happened at all, would have been in the unlocks, separate from the game. Because that's a lot of what the unlock stuff is you're seeing like the fan club record they made, or rare photographs and things like that. Like, that's the part where I could see it almost as like footnotes to the game. Like, by the way, when they recorded this song, this was talking about their first experience with LSD or something. I wouldn't have wanted to see it in the game itself, because that I would have I like it the way it is, as sort of a pure fan service love of the music thing.
I'm assuming that the game has very limited means of communicating this information. That it's in quick loading screens, in things of that nature, right? And then you run into the documentarian's problem of, if you only have 3 screens that you're going to put up that you're going to convey some information about this band, which 3 do you put up? And if you decide to put the one up about the drug use for this album, are you really certain that it's more important than, say, any of the other things that went into the production of the album? I mean, I don't know of an easy way to do it in the format you're talking about.
It's not just the load screens, that they've included all of this historical material about the band for you to go through. And I know it seems like how many dumb unlocks have there ever been in games where you get some, like, text file to read, and how unimportant is that? But the way that they present the stuff in the game, they try to make it seem like it's worth your time. And there are lots of pictures and actually interesting things that go along with it, and audio recordings that you don't get in the game that you get to hear.
And some of the stuff, by the way, if you are a Beatles fan, some of the unlocks are just fucking amazing. It's stuff we've never seen before. There's a video of their of a practice before the Ed Sullivan show. There's stuff like that. So it's just like amazing if you're a fan. So just throwing that in there.
I also think the little audio snippets when they're in the studio and they're just chattering.
Yeah.
So there's all this sort of like off mic stuff of the band, like, hanging out between takes.
Right.
Where, like, obviously that wouldn't be very fun to listen to if you're sitting at home and, like, playing an MP3 or a CD. But in the context of, like, hearing it in between songs as you're waiting for the game to load, it's actually really cool. You get a sense of, like, what they were like hanging out in the studio talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Have we beaten this to death?
I think
Probably.
so.
I think we have. I was going to ask, one thing it sort of raised is everyone here seen Inglourious Bastards yet?
I have
Nope.
not.
I have.
Oh my goodness!
You're turning this
All right,
into
fine.
Nazi
We're
talk?
Well, isn't that Godwin's law, right? I mean,
Yes.
once we started arguing, it was only a matter of time before someone brought up the Nazis. Well, we'll save it. We'll save it for another day. But I would definitely love to talk to you guys about sort of the, about that movie and and a little bit of this game, but in terms of what obligation people have to history.
Yeah.
In their entertainment. So, but we'll table that for another day.
Certainly, if you know nothing about the band, about their music, about them as musicians, this is seriously an amazing place to start. It really is. All the arguments that we're broaching here and that Robert has brought up, I think that's more for next level education. If you just want Beatles 1A, this is certainly a great place to start.
I wonder too, when you're saying that, how many times when you buy an official Beatles, either an anthology or a box set or something, to what extent are the liner notes a series of images and and anecdotes? And I know there's so many with the Beatles, it's hard to say, because I'm sure that you're going to be able to find an example that's like, oh yeah, it covers every sort of detail. It covers But I think for the most part, for years and years, how it would be presented, even in its own collections, they would tend to leave most of that stuff to other people doing unofficial biographies of the band and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you gotta trust people to go out and discover things about the world themselves and not get it all through a video game. And I totally understand that.
If you reviewed this game and you on IGN and you had that paragraph in there about how it and you were just putting it in there as an aside about how it's interesting that the way that this packages the Beatles tends to overlook, omit a ton of potentially more interesting details, you would have all these people pissed off saying, fucking Robert Ashley 7 Rock Band Beatles because it didn't show fucking Paul McCartney getting arrested with a bag of dope at the Tokyo airport.
Right. But all Robert has to do after mentioning that is say, niggles aside. So, and then he
this but that. No,
Yep.
but I think Robert raised some subtly provocative points about the idea of sort of times in our history when singing and making music to get music together was more prevalent, and could this be analogous to that? Again, not a replacement of it by any means, but at a time like where people don't have pianos and sheet music in their houses to the extent that they once did, and that this is in some ways a stand-in for that.
Well, we know it does, right?
Is a really interesting idea.
I mean, we know it does. You've got groups of gamers all over the country or world who are getting together and singing and playing music, or not playing music, but singing at least. And I mean, think about that, just separate from anything else. I mean, there's no way you can picture that without the game. Hey, you guys want to come over and sing Beatles songs together? That just wouldn't happen.
And the thing that's funny is, like, I remember when I was in high school, and people would have, there was a beach that was in the vicinity of where I went to school, and people would go and on weekends and light fires and have sing-alongs. You know what I'm saying? But
right.
As you get older, maybe you do fewer of those kinds of things, and is this the new sing-along? It's I think it's interesting to sort of look at the space that it occupies rather than to sort of speculate, well, this is replacing music making. I mean, like Sean said, we've got bigger issues than that, and the fact that music education in schools is not what it once was.
Yes.
Is a bigger issue, because if it was something like this, these two things could intersect in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
But we're not at that place.
I talked about this exact topic at on the One Up Yours at 2 E3s ago that we taped there, and it was funny because at the time I was reading Musicology by Oliver Sacks, and then also another book called This Is Your Brain on Music.
I read that book. Great book.
Are you saying Musicophilia, not Musicology?
Oh,
right?
sorry, Musicophilia. Yeah, and This Is Your Brain on Music, and I think it was This Is Your Brain on Music that. I had a whole chapter dedicated to the idea that in Western society, communal music has sort of just vanished, and much like so many things, painting and everything, it's become the domain of the specialist. Whereas in other cultures, and especially in Western society before some of these changes, it was the norm for everyone to get together and make music. And at the time, it made me sad looking at these games as being the new form of it, because it seems it's so easy to paint it as representative of the artificial times that we live in and everything. But I think if you look at it like it's either that or nothing, I think there is cause to celebrate. I mean, it is a good thing that it's getting people together in the same way that karaoke did before.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, really, it's a home karaoke in a way, right? And again, you're not just getting people sitting around singing together, but you're also getting them to talk in a way that they probably never would have in their whole lives, in terms of what Robert was talking about earlier, in terms of being able to focus on a certain part of music. If you can get three people who are not musicians, who have never thought about parts of a song or whatever, to say, wow, Paul McCartney's bass line is really interesting. I mean, that's a big fucking victory right there, in a small way.
Yeah, and it helps to have advocates like Robert, who are professional, very, very talented musicians out there, saying that no, this isn't all that bad, that you can't, that even a accomplished musician such as himself can learn things from it and can enjoy it and has a wonderful time playing it. I mean, I think that's like
Robert's validated
they need to
us.
give you some.
Yay!
Thanks, Robert.
Well, and I think the way he phrased it, the idea of it being music, that by simulating music playing, you can hear things in the music, or you may start to hear things and isolate things in the music you had before, and that it becomes a new form of music appreciation. And I don't know how it clearly is not entirely akin to what it would be to learn to play those songs, but I'm sure for those of you who are musicians, is that when you did learn to play certain songs, there were things and complexities and interesting things that you would see in the music that you hadn't seen before when you were just listening.
I would say to anyone who enjoys a music game, though, like, if you like the way that makes your brain feel, you are doing yourself an incredible disservice if you don't do the work to try to learn a music instrument, because it's just so, as much fun as that is. Like, if you can learn to play a musical instrument and make music on your own, like, it's that feeling times 100.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is much of a new self-sustaining topic, but when we were talking about Kurt Cobain being in there, it made me think of how, especially when Final Fantasy Spirits Within came out, all the talk was about how, in the not too distant future, we're going to be able to basically create, digital recreations of all these now deceased stars and famous people, and we'll be able to have, whoever the case may be, you can have, James Dean starring in a Star Wars movie or something like that. So I would imagine that as far as as the games go, that's only going to get worse. But I mean, what's happened with that? I mean, do you, as far as movies, and maybe the fact that Spirits Within sucks so much kind of like put a temporary end to that discussion.
Well, I think just like you have parts of estates representing the deceased members of the Beatles, you have Courtney Love, who's in charge of the Kurt Cobain estate. I think you will see estates. And you already seen it. I mean, the Fred Astaire dancing with the Dust Devil, right? But that was a commercial, a limited, very limited, 30 seconds. That's
and
all
the Bruce Lee playing ping pong and with nunchucks.
Exactly. But I think what you will start to see at some point is actors who are, digitizing themselves and body scanning themselves and that kind of stuff, and basically leaving themselves. And, you might even see something like where I can imagine, if it's not already happening, someone doing it, like where it's like, look, we'll scan you, we'll body scan you, we'll take a reference set of motion capture and have you record a bunch of lines of dialogue so that after you're gone, someone can basically, with the approval of the people you've empowered to be in charge of your estate, exactly. You could sell Pepsi. You could star in, Star Wars Reloaded, a remake of Raging Bull, whatever it is, and people will have all of that data and body scan to be able to recreate you. Of course,
let's take this one step further and say they'll also just like upload you to a server, and then you just do all your acting from there. Like Brad Pitt will never fucking die, and we'll never have any new stars because all the old stars will just be available, like hanging out in the world of fucking Warcraft all day.
That'd be
After
awesome.
that singularity, Robert, we won't be watching movies any longer.
But what I can't wait
We
for
will be
is when,
movies.
like, okay, so they have digital versions of celebrities, but what happens when, like, the full body scanned, fully articulated model of Marilyn Monroe gets leaked on Pirate Bay, and somebody reprograms her with blowjob animations for Second Life 5 or whatever, and you walk around and it's all just like the hottest celebrity stars, like having the dirtiest sex.
That was also part of the concern that came up around the time Spirits Within came out, because there was verisimilitude there. People were like, are you going to have virtual child porn that's technically not involving any children and other shit like that,
Yep.
snuff and just the horrible.
Well, look, I mean, as human beings, like, we're amazing and disgusting in equal measure. So you know that there's some animators at Square who worked on that movie who had the characters doing some freaky shit.
And dude, I
No
want
doubt.
those to leak, man. I've been searching eBay for that.
And I'm sure that Brad Pitt diaper porn is only a few keystrokes away. But
Oh,
I
we
think
can only hope.
That's probably that makes a lot of sense. That's what the audience would be, because if you get to the point where you can put these actors in movies, it's like, why do it at that point, right? I mean, just so someone, unless someone for the person who's responsible for animating and programming it and doing the performance is convinced that for whatever project they want to recreate this person, and that's nerdy in and of itself. But it's like, other than that, why do it? Why not just have some living actor? Is it like, it's not even really them, but there's your answer. You can get them in shitting their diapers.
It's because the classic works of cinema being made right now just can't be made possible without these celebrity actors. So, of course, years from now when they're doing like Transformers 6, they're just going to have to go back and get the actors and use, because they won't be able to find people talented enough to handle those roles,
There will be no new Shia
No.
LaBeouf.
Well,
No.
but seriously, the reason you do it is because that someone other than you, there's been a sunk cost of all of the money that's gone in to establish those people as stars and globally recognized icons, right? So if, like, Megan Fox we still don't know whether or not she can open a movie, let alone act, but we don't know that she can open a movie yet. And, she's been in 2 Transformers movies that have been seen by millions of people and have made like hundreds of millions of dollars. But someone like Marilyn Monroe, where a lot of money was spent years ago establishing her as an icon, it's probably, if you could do it, and if you're doing a movie where you're already going to say, hey, we're already going to be spending a ton of money doing digital animation and CG and all this stuff, it's cheaper to use her. If you have the assets to put it in place. And I think that's what you're going to see, is that it's sort of like, what's more cost effective. Now, the downside of Marilyn Monroe and, sort of deceased celebrities is they can't end up back on TMZ because they can't drunk drive anymore. They can't get caught with drugs. They can't get caught, with
They can't
hookers or
get
any of that
busted
kind
with
of
a
stuff.
strap-on in Second Life, though.
And I'm sure TMZ will be all over that stuff when it happens. But I think that's the reason you're going to see the stuff. And then you look at, there will just be people who sort of say, like, look, the vision I have is, I need Marlon Brando at the age of 25 to star in my movie. That's the vision I have. Personally, I think what you lose is you have a bunch of animators, because it is human beings behind it. It's just a different set of human beings. You have a bunch of animators trying to bring Marlon Brando to life using his likeness and whatever assets they can find. I'm like, is that going to have the same kind of spark as the actor did? And I don't think that's possible.
No,
It's
it
an
will for a
interpretation.
while.
If that's what movies are going to be about, then I'm just not going to give a shit about movies, honestly.
It
Like,
won't-
it's just not going to be something that I'm going to care about.
I agree. I don't think it'll have the same kind of have the same kind of spark, but it'll have a spark similar to that with like hyper realist painters when they first started working, or the same kind of spark that Spirits Within had. You know, you can't believe that that this exists, and then once people are acclimated to that, in the same way we are with modern effects shots, where it's almost backfiring for a lot of us. Like, I see it, and you immediately just identify, like, oh, there's an effects shoot.
I'm going to say that I don't actually think it's going to go this way. I think this was sort of like people in the 50s and 60s talking about, like, you know, moving sidewalks and flying cars. I don't think this is the future. I don't think this is the future we're going to get. I think that, yeah, you know, we're seeing people experiment and we're seeing the technology sort of go in interesting ways. But I think actually there's just always going to be movie stars. There's always going to be real flesh and blood celebrities, and that's always going to be the preferred way that we're going to seek our entertainment, because I think we're clearly already at the uncanny valley, and I don't think it's ever going to be overcome.
But why would you say that when there's, I mean, look at all the glut of remakes that we're seeing. Look at, you know, an artist like, you know, Girl Talk, you know, where, I mean, you know, sampling a bunch of people, some who may be alive, some who maybe not, and creating new music out of it. Why wouldn't people sample actors and sample performances?
Right, and some of that is awesome. And Girl Talk, you know, he happens to be, you know, an incredibly smart and witty and astute guy when it comes to these remixes, and they're very fun to listen to. But still, what I know I'm listening to is artificial, and it doesn't take and it still feels like a guy messing around with something I prefer in the original form. I mean, I don't want to stand completely Luddite here about it, but I do think at root, what we like is the real thing. I don't know. I just don't personally see it happening.
I don't know.
Do you guys all really believe
depends,
that?
Like, it depends. Like, in the future, are games just, you know, us sitting around having conversations with celebrities? Like, I always wonder, like, at what point do games become about conversation? Because I do think it could totally happen. Because that's what people love in movies, is, like, getting into a character and getting to know them. And I've played games that get close to that, where you can enjoy sort of having a conversation with a fake person that's all written, you know. But
right, but we know this. We know this from, you know, just empirically, that most people want to be entertained. They don't want to do the entertaining, right? They want to be told the story. Yeah. They don't want to tell the story.
Although we were just talking about Beatles Rock Band, and I would argue that, you know, when you go to a Beatles Rock Band party, if you're playing, you're the entertainment. You know, everyone's staring at you. People do a lot more work these days. It's kind of amazing. It's like the kids who sit around making animated GIFs for their avatars on NeoGAF or whatever. You know, people are willing to spend a lot of time doing something that might not ever reach an audience beyond their few online friends.
Very true. Yep.
So, yeah. Weird.
And you fools playing Batman? You want to talk about some Batman?
Batman. I would play Batman. That would be fucking incredible, actually.
Tony Montana's Batman.
Set in Miami? That'd be incredible.
Dark Knight of Miami.
Sean, you need to make that comic. Like, that's such a ripe comic. Batman.
He would be like the Punisher, though. Like, he just like catches you stealing a fucking Snickers bar and just chops your hand off right in the fucking snack aisle.
Oh no, I think first of all, Batman is a total cokehead. And, like, is probably not doing
good
for society.
He's feeling so holy, though, like on the coke, that he thinks that he's actually doing good.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a flaming carrot, kind of.
It's already done.
Yeah.
Well, I've played like an hour of Batman. I really haven't had a chance to get around to it. But has anyone else played it?
I played quite a bit. Jeff?
Nah, because I'd have to buy it. So, no.
Oh, and guy?
I have not yet either. My PS3 is with one of my associate consultants doing some other stuff for me. Let me make it clear, though, it's not working on that game. It's some consumer tech stuff I'm doing. So let's just be clear about that. So I had it and haven't had a chance to play it yet.
Okay, well let's hold off to a week when we've all played it. I think it's the kind of game that you guys should definitely play.
I'm looking forward to it.
I was actually going to play it today. I was finishing Shadow Complex. So, yeah.
Well, Sean, real quick, because you were theoretically a bit down on it when we were sort of having the conversation about vision modes in games and stuff like that. But from your Twitter and stuff, it became clear that you'd gotten into it. So what was the first sort of things that really grabbed you about the game?
Well, yeah, I almost felt like an ass as soon as we started playing it because I hadn't even played the demo at the point that, we were sort of just talking about it. So, I mean, total discussion from a position of ignorance on my part. My concerns were also that everything was just too spoon-fed, that there wasn't going to be, because, I heard talk of walls that were tagged destructible, and only being able to grapple to fixed points, that it was just going to be just overly rigid. And despite that, there's like a great deal of room for kind of creative improv with your tactics and the things that you do. But what really impressed me is that I just wasn't expecting a game that seems to be the product of so much time and money and competence in a Batman game. I mean, there's the comment I had about, is it just King shit on Turd Mountain, and that's not the case. I mean, whatever, you could repackage this as a new IP or whatever you want, and it's still a good game. And it's one of those cases, like I think BioShock, were a game that came out in late August that people may or may not have expected anything of, and then you play it and you see that they're doing a whole lot of stuff that I know is going to influence other people.
It's kind of a sad...
I think it's interesting that you mentioned... sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that you mentioned BioShock, because in my small amount of playtime with it, I was kind of amazed that Batman seemed to be... going in the BioShock direction. I mean, the opening reminded me a bit of Riddick, but it also, when you get inside the game and you're in the levels and you'll fight people and stuff. But it's amazing how much space they have dedicated just to storytelling and atmosphere. Like I would enter in a room and like fight 4 dudes and realize that room was made just for this moment in the game, and it was full of all of these sort of interesting little things that didn't have to be there, but were just there to create the environment of the game, and it has a bit of that sort of like storytelling through scenery,
right?
That you see in like BioShock and games like that.
There's excellent mise en scène all throughout, and they do some really smart things to encourage you to pay attention to it too. Like they have this series of Riddler challenges, and what those are is you'll get a clue will pop up on the screen. And at that point, you will basically need to go and scan something in the environment that is the solution to the riddle. But that's just a very smart way to get you to actually pay attention to the fact that this isn't just a bunch of assets for jars or something that someone alt-dragged across a table until it was sufficiently cluttered, that they were actually thinking about what the scene was, and what's on the table matters, and it's telling you a story. And they do a lot of smart things like that, where it's just a matter of taking a necessity and turning it into making it perform a double duty, but in an elegant way. So like they also have the notion that you go into detective mode and you can scan for the presence of pheromones or fingerprints or blood trails or something. And that's just a dynamic waypoint thing in any other game. And we've seen some interesting versions of those, like in the most recent Prince of Persia and in Dead Space, for example, basically navigation aids. But it's just a way to integrate it into the game, but to make especially the casual player not even aware that that's what's happening, that they think, oh, I'm being a detective and I'm following a trail, and instead of just following this meta arrow somewhere on the screen. And it's the fact that it's the fact that there's so many examples, and I'll save them for when we've all played it and can talk about it. But examples of that kind of creativity and just quality of execution that's surprising. Makes it.
Well, I will make sure that I definitely finish it before next episode. So I definitely like to.
All right, I guess I got to actually spend the money then and get it.
Yeah,
sounds like it's worth it.
There's some fun stuff with the ever popular sort of like psychological effects in the game. I mean, in any time in my memory when a game has done something with those, they've been very well received. And, like Eternal Darkness, people still talk about that game, and it's I think largely, if not solely, for the mindfucks that it was pulling off. And when I've listened to people talk about this game, and I've sort of stood on the sidelines and heard what they've had to say about it and what's most memorable to them, it's almost always the stuff that they do with the Scarecrow.
Huh.
And I
Well,
don't
Sean,
want to spoil that. But just,
Sean, now that you're in development, I mean, do you think it's like because you Robert mentioned Riddick, which I think is another game that the first time I heard about it was when it was on the Game Informer cover, and I've since become friends with Pete Wanat, who's the producer of the game. But that was a game that people, it's a licensed game. It's licensed from a movie. People like Pitch Black, but no one really expected much until sort of they got their hands on it and liked it. I mean, is it just a matter of ambition on the part of the developer, or is it something more?
There's always a confluence of things, right? Ambition has to have the time it takes to really go back and do something, and then the money it takes to give you the time to do it and to do it well.
And this game was delayed a few times. Like it was supposed to come out earlier this year. So it wasn't even like they said, all right, we're going to drop this in BioShock month. Like the game, I think, got pushed back, I think maybe twice.
Yeah.
So which is what you're saying in terms of time.
Which is phenomenal. They must have really good deal with their publisher. And that's awesome to see that. And I agree that I reviewed Riddick when it first came out. It was super impressed by that because and again also with Darkness. I mean, then Starbreeze takes they've proven that they have a knack for taking a license and just using it as a point of departure and putting their own stamp on it and making a game out of it, not an adaptation of a movie.
But do you feel like you saw Riddick coming based on what they had done with Enclave?
No, I didn't.
And I think that's how people are feeling about Rocksteady with this. I mean, there was a certain amount of praise for Urban Chaos Riot Response, which this is the shooter, the sort of SWAT-ish tactical shooter that they did. But I don't, no one. I'd been hearing buzz for a few months now before it came out from journalists who'd gotten to play some of it and that kind of thing. That wow, this is really good. This is one of the better games I've played this year. But before that, I had exactly the response you did, which is like, it's Batman. It's not even a movie license, and that doesn't even necessarily mean it's going to be better or worse.
Yeah.
You're just sort of like, well, where's this coming from? And Batman has had a somewhat troubled history as of late, so it's just one of those things like where, to me, it's great to see a team like Rocksteady be, the overnight success that took, didn't happen overnight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it was the same way with Starbreeze. Like, I don't think Enclave necessarily foreshadowed, other than the fact that those guys were maybe skilled technically, I don't think it foreshadowed the quality of the games they went on to make after that.
Right. I was definitely in the same boat with you as Batman. I remember for the entirety of this year seeing like a NeoGAF thread about it and maybe just clicking to look at a screenshot and then not even reading a single word to show you how strong my bias was. And I ran into this again last night in Vent, trying to convince my friends that they should pick it up and play it. And some of them, because they don't read any games coverage or anything, they're just like, "What the fuck? Are you seriously?" They thought I was fucking with them,
right?
And they did for about 10 minutes straight. And I was like, "No, this is an excellent game."
It's because for years, every time there was ever any like remotely playable Batman game, people would be like, "Oh, it's so good, you got to play it."
Yep.
And then you'd see it or you'd play it, and you'd be like, "Jesus, this is horrible." Like, what was that last one that came out that was sort of like a bad Splinter Cell style game that I had a lot of people telling me like it was totally worth playing, but it was because some people just enjoy the Batman thing so much that they're willing to play kind of a shit game, and so it takes a while for it to sink in that like, oh, this is actually like a game, like not just a game for Batman nerds.
Yeah,
it's pathetic that it's come to that.
A few other basic things about it just to push you over the edge to go and buy it is that despite in large part being a stealth game and having, to my frustration, having a lot of just failure states. I mean, if another character dies, it resets. You have to try again, and a number of ways where you can just basically end the game instantly for yourself. It captures like what Metal Gear and Splinter Cell do with the whole waiting on the perimeter and waiting for the observing and then acting. But because it's so fast and you're able to just fly up, onto into the rafters to escape and dive back down, you don't have that really like slow kind of plodding sense that turns a lot of people off with the other stealth games.
Let's say you weren't into
Jeff
Batman at all. Still a good game?
You'd still like it. I'm not the biggest Batman fan at all, and especially the Batman whole rogues gallery I think is largely absurd, and I am totally enjoying it.
Well, Jeff, you're welcome to borrow my copy. I'll probably try to finish it this week, and maybe I can hand it off to you.
We should do that, and then also have a Rock Band Beatles party.
That is a good idea. You need to get your swine flu like way out of your system. My wife would destroy me if I gave her swine flu. She's like on the job market this year. So
yeah, no, I'm watching it. In fact, I was going to go back to work on Friday, and EA said, "Oh no, you're not." So
I bet.
Yeah.
Wow. We'll get well soon.
That's probably a pretty well-rounded little hour and 15-minute show. Is anyone else in agreement about that?
Indeed.
We talked a lot about games this time on Out of the Game.
Yeah,
I guess we're in the game this week, even though it was our 13th episode, the hard luck episode.
Awesome.
I've been in a happy gaming mood, even though I haven't been able to play much from being sick. It was actually one of those lame sicks where, like, I was so sick I couldn't even do that, Sometimes when you're sick, you're sort of like, oh, this is kind of cool because now I can get caught up on stuff, including reading and everything. But this was just sort of like lay in bed and be miserable sick.
Lay in bed and feel like you're hungover all day.
Exactly. Yeah, like, wow, I'm actually so sick I can't even pick up my DS. But coming back from PAX, in spite of the swine flu, I was blown away by how many games are coming up that actually look really great. It just seemed like we're about to enter into some kind of new renaissance for all the platforms or something. At least it felt that way to me at PAX.
What did you see at PAX that made you feel that?
Well,
like any different than because knowing you, and you're a person who knows damn well that the first thing any EIC wants to put on their cover of their magazine or in their editorial in the fall is that I hate to say it, seems like I say this every year, but I think this was the greatest year for gaming.
Oh, holy shit! I was like the last EIC to ever do that. I was always.
I know, and so being that person, I'm curious what you saw at PAX that made you think that we've entered some brave new era of gaming.
I saw things that I think what excited me was I saw stuff that I hadn't heard of, and that looked good to me. And also, maybe I'm just biased because I saw the return of Ron Gilbert as just a fantastic, I'm talking about Deathspank in particular made me incredibly happy seeing Ron Gilbert back. I finally got my first hands-on ever with Brutal Legend, despite the fact that it's being published by my company. I will say that I've been skeptical about that game because, and I'm saying this even as a big Tim Schafer fan, not just as an EA employee, but because I was worried that this game was going to be more about Tim Schafer jokes and Jack Black telling Tim Schafer jokes without any real gameplay to back it up. I thought the gameplay was going to be more perfunctory, but after spending a whole bunch of time with it, I now feel the opposite. I feel excited about it as a game. So, and I don't know, there's a lot of examples of things like that I actually got to check out at the show Left 4 Dead 2 that really made me feel like there's a bunch of really quality products coming up. I just realized again I mentioned an EA published game. I'm really sorry. Let me try to come up with a non-EA published one so I don't sound like totally full of shit.
So what you're saying is there's a renaissance at EA.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. My God, we're
good. Oh Lord.
Wow.
I didn't really get to play much at PAX, but
I saw but did not play Red Dead Redemption behind closed doors. And in case it wasn't clear from previous previews and stuff like that, it's not level/mission based. It's an open world game, and looked spectacular from what they showed. And it also, they said that they're definitely drawing inspiration from Deadwood and The Proposition and Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy and stuff like that. So these guys are definitely running wild on a bigger canvas with this game. And then I'm also into sort of beat making programs on the iPhone, and I got to mess around a little bit with Beaterator for PSP, not the iPhone version.
Wait, that's the name.
And
That is the
got
most
also-
masturbatory sounding game title ever. Beaterator? What are you doing in the bathroom? I'm playing Beaterator.
Sadly, both Robert and my mind went to the exact same place at the same time. That sounds like a masturbation.
I mean, it doesn't
app.
help that it actually rhymes with masturbator. I mean, it's like...
Hopefully that's just a working title.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Wow, you guys think that might have been deliberate?
I don't know.
Probably not. I hope not. That doesn't seem like a
Wow.
very good strategy. But
Robert, do you have an iPhone or a PSP?
I do have an iPhone and a PSP.
You have an iPhone and a PSP.
Yeah.
Well, maybe when it comes out, maybe you and I can get it and just sort of, try and maybe make some beats and pass some stuff back and forth. And I mean, I don't want to, I just think that could be cool. Just mess around with it.
Yeah,
and sort
let's
of
do it.
see
And then
what's
then we'll
there.
make Sean rap over them, and we'll make an entire out of the game episode that's just our rap opera made on iPhone beat makers about I don't know whatever the hell Sean wants to rap about.
Oh, good to hear we got
Exactly.
Jazz English on the podcast this week.
Jay Diddy in the house.
Hey, I gotta
Wow.
say, what I saw that and I don't know if people who are listening to the show might not know that we did a panel at PAX for an old podcast we used to do. But when the audio for that went up on Bitmob, as Geekbox, which is another podcast that you may have heard of, the comments below the podcast were our very own. It was like Bitmob's very own Jazz English makes an appearance in this.
Oh, shit.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and they said it.
Oh,
they said
my
it like
God,
they said it
dude.
like. Listen up! It's gonna have Jazz English on it, and it was just really hilarious.
Wait, Jazz
So-
English is affiliated with that site?
Well, no, he's as affiliated with it as any other kid who's writing stories for them or whatever.
Exactly.
And I don't know if people heard this. People may not have heard about this, but on the podcast at the reunion panel that we did at PAX, this kid during Q&A showed up whose name is Jazz English, and he went to several of the podcast Q&As and asked questions, and he's just a really peculiar guy. Like, I met him, and he's just, I don't know, he's out there, and he asked a very I don't know what the hell he was asking kind of question, and so it's just funny to see people being like, yeah, Jazz English. So,
Well, he's succeeding in getting his name out there, but whether it's for the best, I don't know.
oh, I don't know. Look him up,
But
everybody.
you guys should definitely take a bow for that. I mean, there were people who were lined up for a while waiting to see you guys, and you guys rocked the house Fidel Castro style. I mean, you guys went for 2.5 hours.
Is Fidel Castro style good? I don't
He's known
understand
to
your
rock a
lingo.
house.
Okay.
It's just spicy.
Exactly, just because he was known for giving like really long speeches, but and not only that, I saw you guys outside afterwards. You were signing posters, you were signing autographs for fans, all that stuff. I mean, there was definitely a lot of love in the room for you guys and what you did. And I think to sort of say, call GFW a podcast that you used to do is sort of underselling it.
No, I think that people mainly just oversell it. I don't know why there were like 300 people in the room for that. It was kind of insane.
It was
but
insane.
I think
I
they
know-
were
in
all
a
into.
good way.
I
It
think
was
they were all
awesome,
into.
but-
It was awesome.
They were all into diaper porn, and
Yeah.
Sean delivered.
Yeah.
They're all into diaper porn, and Sean brought it home.
It was really, really fun for us to do. Yeah.
It was fun. Well,
Excellent. Well, I think on that note,
I think so.
I think we just sputtered out. I think we just had our awkward
We did.
goodbyes.
Womp womp.
And on that note,
All right.
we out.